Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me. My name is Schojohann. I'm CEO of Cryptar, and today I'm here on behalf of Plattform Industrie 4.0 to give you an initial preview of our upcoming publication. For those of you who are not familiar with Plattform Industrie 4.0, we're a network of industry experts and organizations led by the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. And in this context, the experts are organized in different groups focused around key topics to enable Industry 4.0. Our group specifically is called Collaborative Condition Monitoring. We're a project group and we're interdisciplinary. So that means our group consists of roughly 20 people, which also partly are part of the other working groups, and we meet on a bi-weekly basis to essentially figure out how to get a minimum viable collaboration started. In this context, so far 2 publications have been published. The first one was Collaborative Data-Driven Business Models. The second one, Multilateral Data Sharing in Industry. And now the upcoming one will be The Way to Become a Digital Champion, which is supposed to be released by the Hanover International Trade Fair. So as part of this publication, of course, we thought about how to become a digital champion. We first of all need to look at where we're actually heading towards. So in the target image of production in 2030, companies will become a structured network of digital twins. So on the one hand, we have the physical world, which then gets represented in asset administration shells or digital twins. And then again, based on that, we can look at our business from a completely digital view. However, for that to really benefit us and to take advantage of it, we need to make sure that all participants, not only one company is digitalized and essentially can work in the individual business world, but that every participant is on a similar level at least. And also self-sovereignty in this context means nobody has to be forced into decisions of others, but in the end everybody should be able to build his own business, develop business models the way he sees suited best for himself or his own organization. Then of course the value chains need to be interoperable, because this is how we're going to gain a lot of flexibility but also resilience for the supply chains. And of course, the business models need to be sustainable, not only from an ecological perspective, but of course also from a business perspective and a legal perspective. The next thing we looked at is why do we actually need to go in this direction, or what are the key drivers bringing us there? In terms of motivation, we can say there are basically 3 key areas which we identified. One is, of course, the optimization of existing products and processes, so that we can, for instance, improve the quality through transparency, but also, of course, fine-tune our processes for maximum efficiency. Then, of course, the development of new business models. How can we collaborate? How can we build new services based on that information which we can now gather in the digital world? And last but not least, of course, also compliance to current as well as future regulations. However, when we look at the motivation, we also need to acknowledge what is the current status quo? Where are we today in order to get to that future scenario in 2030, which is actually rather close? So today, looking at it honestly, we have a set of bilateral data exchanges across the value chain. So when we, for instance, request information like a product carbon footprint, that request will be handed along the value chain, and then the information will also flow downstream back to the manufacturer. However, what that means is that the moment we request a certain piece of information, like the product carbon footprint, every single player within the supply chain will be involved. Everybody will have to hand that request further, but also everybody will have to prepare that information for the next in line, basically, in order to have a complete picture at the OEM at the end of the day. The challenge with that is not that it's one request, right? The challenge is that we have more and more requests coming which are relevant across the value chain. And the big effort is not only to provide the data, but also everybody might need it in a slightly different format or slightly different context. So everybody involved needs to touch, format the data in order to make it usable for the recipient. Also, we need to make sure, because it's sometimes regulatory relevant, that the data is audit-proof. So how do we also verify that the data we're working with is authentic if it has to travel across so many different steps? And how do we make sure our data is also being protected while it's being sort of widely shared across the supply chain? And even when it comes to sharing, we can build portals. But then again, when we look at the picture on the right, the further we go down the line, the more requests will come in. And then you will have to deal with multiple different portals. But even if you build integrations, you will have to manage a lot of complex point-to-point relationships, even between the systems. And as we said, the requests are not going to become less in the future. So when we look already at existing regulations like the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act or the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, we have a lot of requests which require transparency across the supply chain. But also when we look at upcoming topics like the Digital Product Passport as part of the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, will even expand those demands. So when we know today already there's no way around multilateral data sharing one way or another, certain questions come up naturally. And so if I have to do all of this effort, is there a way that I can economically profit from all of this? And also, if I have to do this, how can I prevent abuse of my data or my information? What exactly do I need to do? How high do I need to jump to fulfill the requirements of the regulation? And again, how do I ensure the authenticity of all of that if in the end of the day I'm going to be held accountable? So to answer all of these questions, they can't be answered straight away. In order to get a proper picture of how you need to deal with that internally within your organization, you need to do some homework or have some understanding about your data landscape in the organization. For this, we looked at the RAMI 4.0 reference architecture because we think it's a great mean in order to align different perspectives within an organization. Of course, there are different means and ways, but this is something which can be used rather easily out of the box, whereas nothing is easy in such a complex world. But the big advantage is we're combining lifecycle value stream information with hierarchical levels, as well as the architectural layers. And in the publication, we focus primarily on the architectural layers. So starting bottom to top, we have the physical asset in the world, essentially what we can touch. Then we have to transition to the real world. How do we make that asset talk? Can it talk already? If not, how do we make it talk? If there's no point in have it talking, do I need to document it? What information is relevant to it? And how do I assign an identity to that asset? Then again, the question is, how do I access that information? What information is really necessary to fulfill the business functions? And of course, what are the essential functions of the asset? And the top layer is then again the organization and the business processes. So why is this relevant? Because if we want to build new business models based on multilateral data sharing, we need to understand what data we need, what data we have, how much effort it is to obtain that data to make it shareable. So when we think of building a new model or developing a new capability, our recommendation is really to climb down the different layers of the RAMI model together with all involved parties, because that really helps to break the necessary actions into digestible steps and have clear responsibilities also aligned to them. So while we're walking through those different layers, The idea is really also to think about the external requirements which I'm facing in this context. So, for instance, if I want to use that data externally, what requirements does the other party pose to me in order to be able to use it? Do I need to prove where I got the data from? Do I need to have certain formats? Do I need to anonymize data? What are the legal requirements in the overall context? How can I handle the data? Is it actually my data to share, or do I need to request that information from somebody else again? Similarly, if we get requests in terms of, please share this type of data, this is now for a business model, but please share this kind of data, we can do the journey bottom up. So we start really with the asset. You want to have information about this asset. Okay, how do we obtain that information, and how do we make it actionable on a business level? So with this approach, we can essentially take the physical world, take sensors or devices, walk through the RAMI journey, so to say, and based on that, build a digital representation as a digital twin. And in this way, physical assets get their digital twins across the entire product lifecycle, because it doesn't help us to have just one spot moment represented in an asset administration shell. Then, of course, the companies, we put those digital twins together to represent the structure of the company or the organization, the processes. And, of course, we need to be able to find or identify those digital twins in a kind of search catalog, for instance, and need to make sure we assign the right access rights so that that information, of course, can only be accessed in a controlled manner. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the asset administration shell is essentially one example of such digital twins. It works very similarly, of course, also in the logistics context, even though not every box might be willing to talk to us. But we can at least assign a unique serial number, and by that also consolidate relevant information around that asset in an asset administration shell in order to have it represented in our digital world. So now that we're talking about gathering all of the data, what we really want to prevent is that we essentially build this picture with all of those letters flying across the supply chain. We don't want to have that scenario within our organization either. So we need to protect the core systems from getting too many loads, too many requests. So that's why we also looked at what kind of internal architectures do we need to consider in order to be able to manage our data effectively. And we came to the conclusion that data-centric architectures are one very good way to think about it, because we can separate the data sources, essentially with data hubs, where then the data is transferred rather quickly into those hubs, but then the different applications and analytics tools can use those hubs in order to obtain the data in the most suited way. So we can also separate cold and hot data and really make sure we manage it most effectively, while of course having to build a governance model and security model around all of that. But mastering data internally is of course essential if we want to share data externally. So when it then comes to sharing data externally, we also looked at the federator approach, of course, because once you're able to provide that data and you want to share it, this picture shows now two actors, which would be bilateral again, but of course, please imagine there can be multiple ones on both sides. And based on that, of course, it makes a lot of sense to have a federator who, on the one hand, manages the metadata and is able to essentially connect the different parties in terms of what is offered, what is requested, and monitor the data space so that everybody feels secure also in the environment with the data provided, and that only the right people get access to the provided data. However, also that is of course not very trivial, because if we want to build a data space together with different parties, we need to align on different dimensions. And that's also one of the key parts of our publication, where we say it's not only the economic and the legal and the technical dimension which needs to be aligned between the different participants, but also the social-cultural dimension. Now, if that wasn't complicated enough, the really tough part about this is that the different dimensions influence one another, and it can have a completely different meaning for different organizations. So for instance, if we look at SMB businesses, and they might have less technical maturity in order to connect, so the investment for connectivity to a data space is much higher. Then it depends what is the planning horizon, on how long can you invest in order to obtain a certain skill or capability. And then the question is again, is that still suitable for the organization or within the time frame of achieving that joint data space? In general, we also looked at what are the core motivations to build a joint data space. And in this context, we found that, of course, there's the legal motivation. We must share data. Then there's a technical motivation because we can, for instance, when we look at generative AI, but also altruistic motivations when we look at smart cities, but also deep research topics in terms of fundamental science. But last but not least, and that's of course in Industry 4.0 the key focus, there's also the core of the economic motivation, where every actor needs to economically benefit essentially from participating. However, here also it has to be clear that all participants need to agree before they join a data space what is their goal in doing so. Because you can't have some parties providing data on an altruistic motive. The next one comes in and says, hey, this is my economic model. Somebody will be unhappy in this relationship, right? So, as I said, the key focus for us is on the economic motivation. And now when we look at how do we get actually different parties aligned to start a minimum viable collaboration, or let's better say a minimum viable multilateral collaboration, so to say, is really to work through this process step by step. So what we recommend is first agree with the different parties on the vision. Why do you want to collaborate? Why do you want to share the data? And it's very critical that everybody who's also supposed to connect later onto the data space is involved in that discussion. Because if this goes wrong, or if there's a misalignment here, which is noticed at a later stage, the data space will simply fail to gain adoption. Then, if the vision is clear between the participants, every individual participant has to go back internally and do the RAMI journey. Figure out, where do I have the data? How much effort will it cost me to provide that data? What are the legal risks I might be having while dealing with the data? And once everybody has done their homework in that way, they can come back and actually agree on the data exchange framework. So we have first the management process level, why are we doing this? Then we have the performance process level, what are we actually going to do? And then, last but not least, the supporting process level of how are we going to collaborate around that data. And in order to simplify that a little bit, we have also developed different canvases, which are meant to be used as a first point of alignment. Like, everybody can fill those canvases. They're also different for different roles. And based on that, you can then come back together and figure out where are we aligned, where are we misaligned, what do we still need to figure out to get the collaboration started. So in summary, we can say mastering data is essential for any sustainable business. Not only sustainable, as I said previously, for the environment, but also in terms of economical success. RAMI 4.0 is a good model to help align the requirements and the required implementation steps. And data becomes, if not part of, it becomes its own products and requires governments across the entire data lifecycle. And in order to manage that effectively, we think that data-centric architectures are a good approach. And at the end of the day, collaborative data sharing will only succeed if the incentives of all participants are aligned on the economical, technical, legal, as well as socio-economical dimension. So thank you very much. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you want to get hold of the full publication once it's there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. As you all know, we have the possibility to use Slido to interact with our speakers, also online. Yes, we have Q&As now. Also online, you can scan this QR code to ask your questions. I hope you can see it online. I hope it's fine. If you have questions right now, I think the first one is already there. Where do we see it? Oh, here, up here. Do you believe, Tim, do you believe we're addressing the right stakeholders of companies to become a digital champion?
I think I need clarification on the question.
Is this person here? Maybe we can first jump to the second question and you can type in your specifications. So as an IT consulting company, are we going to miss business opportunities if we don't join data spaces projects?
Not operator. So in terms of not operating the data space themselves, but being part of data space projects.
Yes.
Well, that really depends, I think, on the focus of the IT consulting company. What is your consulting business? Where's your key capabilities? And where should your focus be? Like, just because you're IT consulting, you don't need to be part of every data space. There are still different parts and different homework, which also needs to be done internally within organizations. But I think that's an essential part to understand where the future is going towards, so that even as an IT consulting organization, we can identify early on what roadmap we have to go through with the customer in order to prepare them. So I think it's a mix depending on the focus of the consultants.
So did we get a clarification on the first question? No. So how do you believe we're addressing the right stakeholders?
Let me try a generic
yes,
approach
that
to
would
that.
Be very good.
Because it's we also, of course, had the discussion as part of Plattform Industrie 4.0. Who are actually the stakeholders? And the stakeholders are the entire organizations, right? However, then is the question, who are the decision makers in that organization in order to walk in that direction? And that, again, comes also back to the social-cultural dimension, because some organizations, and it's not only social-cultural across country borders when we think about international value chains, but it's also big difference between smaller businesses and large enterprises. Who are what decision makers, and as long as that's not very clear, we sort of have to address the vision on an executive level, but we also need to give the technical tools on an operational level to enable both. So in the end of the day, it should be a top-down as well as bottom-up approach. As a generic answer, I hope that satisfies the question.
Yes, thank you, Tim. We have two more questions coming in. Will AAS be integrated in IDSA data space specifications, Gaia X and related data spaces? IDSA is maybe a typo?
Data
or is it IDS? Sorry.
To be honest, I don't have an answer to that. I don't make those decisions. I'm happy to figure it out if you can shoot me the question by email, but I won't know, honestly.
And which company is a digital champion now, in your opinion?
Well, that's the tough part, because as we've shown in the very beginning, in the target picture, we need to have multiple parties being able to collaborate on that level. In the publication, we've taken an example of ADA-ProQ, which is a project which has shown great advancement so far. However, it's all an evolving journey, so to say, so we can't say we're there yet, or this company is the one, copy everything they're doing and you're fine, because at the end of the day, it really depends on the individual internal journeys of what to make out of it. And maybe not everybody needs to digitize everything, but we need to find our own priorities in order to collaborate.
Yeah, I think so too. Every company is different. So what is your gut feeling? Are companies ready to share all these data, technical-wise as well as mindset-wise?
No. We're not. The big barrier is, of course, mindset, and a lot of that comes also from the level of understanding of your internal data. Because if you can't judge the level of risk which is associated to a certain data set, well, you better don't share it. The more secure you get in those exercises, of course, the more secure you can also feel while sharing data. So yeah, that's tough. Yeah. Yeah.
Then a question I like very much as a representative of the Platform Industry 4.0. How do you see the role of the Open Industry 4.0 Alliance as an implementation alliance?
So I think we're starting to grow more and more together as organizations, and I also see both as complementary to one another. On the one hand, of course, Platform Industry 4.0 comes more is led by the ministry. Therefore, also a bit more, say, on the theoretical side of the world, even though we're also talking about implementation and we're also doing things in that way. However, from my understanding, Open Industry Alliance is much more bottom-up and hands-on compared to us. And at the end of the day, as I said, it has to be a top-down and a bottom-up approach to make this really work. And this is where I think both platforms can really complement one another very powerfully if we do it right.
We will. we hope to cooperate more.
Yes, we keep working on it.
Okay. The next question is about data spaces. How many data spaces does a company need to join to share data with a global customer base?
Yeah. That's where I have a very personal opinion, because I don't think we're going to build the digital world government. And that's what we essentially would need if we want to have one data space internationally across an industry or whatever. Therefore, in the end, it will come down to individual data spaces which serve very specific purposes for the organizations participating. And then, of course, also when we want to connect different data spaces, we also need to find ways to align the level of trust, because if I have a data space which I don't trust and it's connected to mine which I trust, why would I trust the information coming from the one I don't trust? And that's still a journey. I think we're going to see different data spaces very specifically popping up, and based on the design of those data spaces, how open are they really? How self-sovereign are the participants? How internationally accepted is also the security of the infrastructure? Is it really independent? Will all make the differences to the degree how much the data space can scale at the end of the day. But saying I'm going to build something and it's going to be the new global thing, not going to happen.
We have two more questions.
Yeah.
How could a positive financial business impact look like?
Well, on the one hand, I think if you look at in very simple terms, when we look at the administrative effort which is coming towards us with the new regulations already, and we talk a lot about the administrative effort really, if we can automate a lot of that in terms of integration, in terms of data sharing, collaboration, that will reduce the burden a lot, and that's already a business case which should justify in itself, because at some point you can't throw more people at a problem, but you need to work with automation. And in the digital world, if we don't have a digital, how do we automate it? So.
And now the last question, we already have the next speaker lining up. Can you provide your thoughts on infrastructure and connectivity challenges related to data-centric architectures in this context?
No.
That's a short answer.
On a very high level, of course, it comes back to integration standards. How do we shape our data? Also, how do we provide the data in terms of how do we give a federator access for instance, and that's where the different factors we discussed earlier come together. There are certainly more challenges on a deep technical level, but I wouldn't be the right person to answer that. That's why I said no, but yeah, there's sort of an answer, but yes.
Okay, if you want more answers, Tim is here for the 2 days,
Yes.
and you can meet him in the coffee breaks, at lunch break this evening, and ask all your other questions that you have in mind. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you.